Two worlds. The office of Hensley and Company looked the same every day. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, turning everyone's skin a shade too pale. Rows of cubicles stretched across the floor like a maze designed to swallow individuality whole. Monitors glowed, keyboards clicked, phones rang. And in the middle of it all sat Michael Hudson, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes hidden behind black-rimmed glasses that made him look even more forgettable than he already was. To his co-workers, Michael was the kind of man you nodded at in the break room but rarely talked to. He answered politely when spoken to, kept his desk clean, and never shared much about his personal life. No pictures of family, no trinkets from vacations, no plants wilting on the windowsill. Just a monitor, a notebook, and a stack of reports. A ghost in daylight. At 35, Michael was not the type to stand out. Medium height, lean frame, dark hair he kept neatly trimmed. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. He never joined the after-work drinks, never volunteered for group projects, never flirted with the interns like the others did. If someone had asked who Michael Hudson was, most would have shrugged. Nice guy. Quiet. Doesn't cause trouble. That was exactly how Michael wanted it. At 6:02 p.m., when the last emails were sent and chairs squeaked across the floor, Michael powered down his computer. He slipped into his gray coat, said a brief good night to no one in particular, and disappeared into the elevator. Another ordinary day. Another mask well worn. But once the sun slipped behind the skyline of Manhattan and the city's neon pulse replaced the pale glow of office lights, Michael Hudson ceased to exist. He walked out of the subway on the Lower East Side, but this time without the glasses. His coat was gone, replaced by a dark leather jacket. He moved with a purpose that daytime Michael never possessed. Shoulders squared, eyes sharp, gait confident. He blended into the night not as a ghost, but as a predator who knew exactly where to step and when. In a small apartment 2 blocks from Delancey Street, he opened a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside lay a different life. Black gloves, a slim laptop, a lockpick set worn smooth from years of use, and a sleek pistol he rarely needed but always carried. The tools of Raven, the name whispered in New York's underworld whenever a safe cracked open with surgical precision or when priceless jewels vanished without a trace. Raven was not loud. He was not reckless. He was deliberate, meticulous, the kind of thief who left law enforcement baffled and rivals envious. While others made headlines with blood and chaos, Raven left behind silence, and a signature no one could prove existed. Tonight was no different. By midnight, Michael stood on the rooftop of a luxury condo on 57th Street, the wind sharp against his face. Through a small earpiece, a distorted voice guided him. Cameras looped. You've got 6 minutes before the next sweep. Michael smirked. The voice belonged to Zara, his partner in this life, a hacker who preferred basements and glowing screens to rooftops and cold air. She was his eyes in the system, the one who erased him from digital existence while he danced through the shadows. Plenty of time, he whispered back. He attached a line to the roof's anchor point and slid down the side of the building, landing soundlessly on a balcony 20 stories above the street. Inside was the condo of a hedge fund manager with more greed than sense. Michael bypassed the alarm panel in less than a minute, stepping into a room filled with marble and chrome. Every detail was calculated, the hours of surveillance, the exact timing of the patrol downstairs, the routines of the target. Michael's double life wasn't chaos. It was a chess game, and he had learned long ago that survival depended on staying 3 moves ahead. Within 12 minutes, the safe was open. He pocketed a velvet pouch of diamonds, closed the door gently, and wiped every trace of his presence. No fingerprints, no broken locks. To the hedge fund manager, it would look like the jewels had simply evaporated. By 2 a.m., Michael was back in his apartment. The pouch of diamonds rested in the hidden floor compartment, alongside others from past nights. He sat at his small wooden table, a single lamp casting shadows across the room, and stared at the black gloves still on his hands. For a moment he closed his eyes. The thrill of the night still buzzed in his chest, yet beneath it lay something else, exhaustion, maybe even emptiness. He wondered if he had become too good at splitting himself in two, if the line between Michael Hudson and Raven was beginning to blur. Then his phone vibrated. A message from Zara. Nice work. Buyer's happy. Same cut as usual. Michael typed back a single word, good. He tossed the phone aside and leaned back in his chair. Tomorrow morning he would put on the glasses again, not the tie, and return to his cubicle. No one would suspect that the quiet man in accounting had just pulled off another flawless heist. 2 worlds. 2 lives. And for now the mask still held. The mask of night. The night had always been Michael's sanctuary. Daylight belonged to others. To bosses who barked orders, to co-workers who laughed at jokes he never found funny, to strangers who brushed past him on crowded sidewalks without a second glance. But the night was his alone. When the world slept, he thrived. Michael sat at his small kitchen table, a cup of black coffee untouched beside him. The diamonds from the hedge fund manager's safe still glimmered faintly in his mind. He had turned them over to Zara earlier that morning, receiving his cut through a chain of encrypted accounts that no investigator could trace. By noon, the stones would be halfway across the Atlantic, and Raven's reputation would have grown again, even though most people didn't believe Raven was real. That was part of the beauty. In New York's underworld, Raven was a rumor more than a man. Some said he was a former jewel appraiser gone rogue. Others whispered he was an ex-CIA operative. A few insisted Raven wasn't a single person at all but a team of professionals working in perfect synchronization. The truth, that Raven was a quiet accountant with a forgotten desk in Midtown, was so absurd that no one would ever consider it. And Michael intended to keep it that way. Still, anonymity didn't mean invisibility. He had noticed the signs weeks ago: an unfamiliar sedan parked too long across from his building, a man in a suit lingering near the subway entrance, the faint feeling of being watched when he walked home at night. Law enforcement was sniffing around. Whether it was the NYPD, the FBI, or someone worse, Michael couldn't yet tell. But he knew the rhythm of a hunt, and he knew it was getting closer. "Someone's on you," Zara had warned over the encrypted line 2 nights ago. Her voice, always steady, carried a note of concern. "Your name's not in any system, I made sure of that, but your face has been flagged. Facial recognition sweeps picked you up near a job in Queens. I scrubbed it, but they'll keep looking." Michael had only nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He trusted Zara, but he also trusted the inevitability of pursuit. Every mask cracked eventually. The trick was keeping it intact just long enough to slip away. Tonight, though, there was no running. Tonight he had work. The job came through an intermediary, a high-profile client who wanted a collection of rare bonds stored in a private vault uptown. The pay was obscene, the risk even higher. But Raven had a rule: never turn down a challenge. The myth needed feeding, and the myth thrived on impossibility. By 11:45 p.m., Michael was on the roof of the Target building, a discreet financial firm whose glass facade reflected the glittering skyline. He wore a matte black suit tailored for silence, gloves that fit like second skin, and a mask, not a theatrical disguise, but a thin layer of material that shadowed his features just enough to confuse cameras. The mask was more than fabric. It was transformation. When Michael pulled it over his face, he was no longer the man who filed tax reports and answered emails. He was Raven, the figure who moved without hesitation, whose heartbeat slowed instead of quickened, who calculated every risk as though the outcome had already been written. "North stairwell is clear," Zara's voice came through his earpiece. 2 guards in the lobby, 1 at the service entrance. "You've got a 3-minute window before patrol." Michael slipped inside. The stairwell smelled of disinfectant and stale concrete. His movements were fluid, rehearsed. He had memorized the blueprints days ago, studied guard rotations until they played in his head like music. The challenge wasn't getting in. It was leaving with the bonds before anyone knew they were gone. He reached the sublevel vault in 7 minutes flat. The door was an imposing slab of steel with a keypad and biometric scanner. Most would have seen an impenetrable barrier. Michael saw an equation waiting to be solved. "Talk to me," Zara whispered. "Model 502B biometric overlay," Michael replied, already kneeling by the panel. "Standard bypass should work, but I'll need 60 seconds. The lock yielded in 47. The door swung open and Michael stepped into the vault. Rows of safe deposit boxes lined the walls, their polished surfaces gleaming in the low light. At the center stood the target, a secured case containing government bonds worth millions. He opened it without ceremony, slipped the documents into a protective sleeve, and sealed the case again. No mess, no alarms, no theatrics. Raven's style was never about chaos. It was about precision, invisibility. But as he turned to leave, a voice cut through the silence. "Don't move." Michael froze. A guard stood at the entrance, gun drawn, eyes wide with shock. Clearly, this wasn't part of the usual rotation. "Hands where I can see them," the guard barked. Michael raised his hands slowly, calculating. The distance between them was 12 feet. The guard's stance was shaky, his grip too tight, nervous, inexperienced. Dangerous but not impossible. In Michael's ear, Zara hissed, "What the hell?" He wasn't supposed to be there. The guard stepped closer. "Mask off. Now." Michael's mind split in two, one side coolly assessing trajectories, angles, possibilities, the other quietly screaming that this was the end, that the mask had finally cracked. But Raven didn't panic. Raven never panicked. In a sudden, fluid motion, he shifted his weight, sending the sleeve of bonds sliding beneath a shelf. At the same time, he lunged sideways, knocking the guard's arm with surgical precision. The gun discharged, deafening in the confined space, but the bullet slammed harmlessly into the steel door. Before the guard could recover, Michael struck him once in the temple. The man crumpled soundlessly. Michael stood there for a moment, chest rising and falling, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the vault. That had been too close. Too sloppy. Raven was supposed to leave no trace, and a discharged weapon was a trail of breadcrumbs straight to him. "Are you clear?" Zara's voice was sharp now. Michael retrieved the bonds, wiped every surface he had touched, and slipped out through the service corridor. By the time the other guards discovered their unconscious colleague, Raven would be gone, vanished into the night like a shadow no one could catch. But as he disappeared into the city, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in years: vulnerability. The mask had worked again, but only barely. And somewhere he knew someone was already piecing the puzzle together. Someone who believed Raven was real. Someone who wouldn't stop until they proved it. Traces of the past. Michael Hudson rarely dreamed, or if he did, the memories vanished by the time he woke. But sometimes, usually after a job that cut too close, the past forced its way back in, vivid as if it had never left. The sound of sirens. The slam of a door. A voice shouting his name. When he opened his eyes that morning, the taste of it lingered, copper and smoke, like the night his childhood ended. Michael grew up in Queens in a modest two-story house with peeling paint and a narrow driveway. His father, Thomas Hudson, was a decorated NYPD detective, the kind of man who believed in law, order, and clean shoes polished every Sunday. To neighbors he was a hero. To Michael he was an unshakable force, a man carved from rules and expectations. "You want to survive in this world, you live by the book," Thomas used to say, pointing to the heavy badge he carried like a second heart. "Cross the line even once and you're lost. Understand?" Michael always nodded, though he never truly understood. His mother, Anna, softened the edges. She worked at a library, spoke in gentle tones, and filled the house with the scent of baked bread and lavender candles. Where Thomas taught rigidity, Anna taught wonder. She read him stories about explorers, thieves, and magicians, tales of people who slipped through the cracks of society and made their own rules. "You don't have to be the strongest to survive," she would whisper as she tucked him in. "You just have to see what others don't." The two halves of his childhood pulled him in opposite directions, the law and its shadow. The fracture came when Michael was 15. It was late autumn, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Michael had been waiting at the kitchen table for his parents to come home from dinner. Instead, it was two officers who knocked on the door. Their uniforms gleamed, but their eyes carried pity. There had been a robbery gone wrong. Shots fired in a back alley. Thomas Hudson, badge still pinned to his chest, had stepped into the line of fire. By the time backup arrived, he was gone. The world shifted that night. Anna fell into silence, moving through the house like a ghost. The warmth of bread and lavender faded, replaced by the cold weight of absence. Michael, left alone with grief, turned inward. The rules his father had lived by hadn't saved him. The law hadn't protected him. And somewhere in the hollow quiet, Michael realized he no longer believed in the system his father had died defending. Years later, the second fracture came. Michael was 22, studying accounting at CUNY, trying to honor his father's memory with a life of stability. Anna had grown frail, her health fragile from years of quiet despair. The medical bills mounted, faster than his part-time jobs could cover. One night, desperate, Michael stumbled into a poker game in a dim basement on Roosevelt Avenue. He had always been good with numbers, good at patterns. He thought he could win enough to cover the overdue bills. Instead, he left with nothing but debt. Debt owed to men who smiled without humor and made promises backed by knives. The choice was stark: pay what he didn't have or disappear. That was when Zara entered his life. She was older by a few years, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, a hacker who thrived in digital shadows. She found him nursing a bruised rib in a Queens laundromat and offered him a way out. "You're good with numbers," she said, dropping a lockpick set on the table between them. "Let's see if you're good with patterns that don't fit in spreadsheets." Desperation made him say yes. And just like that, Michael Hudson crossed the line his father had warned him about. The first job was small, cracking a safe in a pawn shop that doubled as a laundering front. His hands shook so badly he nearly failed, But when the tumblers clicked and the drawer slid open, something ignited inside him. Fear, yes, but also exhilaration. For the first time since his father's death, Michael felt alive. He didn't tell Anna. She never knew that the money paying for her treatments came from locks picked in the dead of night, or accounts siphoned through digital back doors. She smiled at him, grateful, believing her son had found honest work. When she died 2 years later, Michael stood alone again, but now he had 2 lives instead of 1. The mask was forming even then. Back in the present, Michael sat on the edge of his bed, running his hands through his hair. Morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, painting stripes across the room. The memories clung like cobwebs, refusing to shake loose. He rose, pulled on his glasses, and stared at himself in the bathroom mirror. Without the mask, without the jacket, without the shadows, he looked ordinary. Forgettable. Just another man on his way to work. But inside, the fracture still burned. His father's death. His mother's quiet grief. The debt that forced his first crime. Every step had led him here, to this double life balanced on a knife's edge. As he adjusted his tie and prepared to step back into the fluorescent maze of Hensley and Company, Michael felt the same question gnaw at him as it had for years. Was he still the son of a man who believed in law? Or had Raven consumed him completely? For now, the answer remained buried in the shadows. The hunt begins. The FBI field office on Varick Street smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer toner, the kind of place where days blurred into nights without anyone noticing. Agent Daniel Mercer sat at his cluttered desk, flipping through a stack of case files that had been keeping him awake for weeks. At the center of it all was a ghost. A thief with no fingerprints, no witnesses, no mistakes, at least none that stuck. They called him Raven. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He was 40 now, hair beginning to gray at the temples, though his build was still solid from years in the bureau. He had seen con men, killers, hackers who thought they were gods behind a keyboard. But Raven was different. Raven was meticulous. Raven was patient. And worst of all, Raven was winning. Still chasing fairy tales? A voice asked. Daniel looked up to see Agent Marissa Clark leaning on the edge of his desk, her eyebrow arched in amusement. She was sharp, ambitious, the kind who treated every case like a ladder rung to climb higher. He's not a fairy tale, Daniel muttered, flipping open the latest report. Look at this. High-value bonds lifted from a vault uptown 2 nights ago. No forced entry, no alarms tripped. Only one anomaly. A guard swears he heard a noise, went to check, and woke up unconscious. Marissa shrugged. Could have been anyone. Inside job maybe. Some drunk guard who doesn't want to admit he fell asleep. Daniel shook his head. No. It's the same pattern. Clean entry, clean exit. A whisper in the dark. That's Raven's signature. Marissa smirked. If you say so. Just don't let this obsession eat you alive. But as she walked away, Daniel's eyes lingered on the case board. Photos of crime scenes, maps, scribbled notes pinned with red string. A puzzle that refused to solve itself. He didn't care what Marissa thought. He knew Raven was real. And he was going to prove it. Across the city, Michael Hudson sat in a cafe near Bryant Park, pretending to read a newspaper. The disguise was simple. Different glasses, a tweed cap pulled low, a worn jacket that smelled faintly of smoke. He looked like a man waiting for a late train, forgettable enough to disappear into the crowd. But his eyes weren't on the paper. They were on the man across the street. Tall. Suit too clean. Shoes polished. The kind of man who pretended to blend in but carried himself like law enforcement. He'd been there yesterday too, different angle, same watchful gaze. Michael folded the paper neatly, left a few bills on the table, and slipped into the moving current of pedestrians. He never looked back, but his pulse beat faster. Zara had been right. Someone was closing in. Back in his apartment, he activated the secure line. Zara's voice crackled through, half buried in static. You were tailed again. Michael didn't bother asking how she knew. Zara had eyes in places most people didn't even realize existed. Feds? He asked. Probably. Their style's too neat to be mob, too patient to be NYPD. And get this, her keyboard clattered in the background. I traced one of their facial recognition queries. Name attached to it is Daniel Mercer. FBI. Counterintelligence turned special crimes. Michael froze. The name was a ghost of its own. Mercer. He remembered it. Years ago, before Raven, before the mask had fully formed, there had been a job that went sideways. A warehouse in Brooklyn, stolen tech, a raid that came down hard. Michael had barely slipped away, but one detail stuck with him. The voice shouting orders in the chaos. Mercer. Now he was back, and this time he wasn't chasing shadows. He was chasing Michael. That evening, Daniel sat in his car across from a row of brownstones, eyes fixed on one in particular. He'd followed the trail from the cafe to here, noting every turn, every hesitation. He hadn't seen the man's face clearly, but instinct screamed that he was close. He flipped open a small notebook, scribbling down the time and address. A lead. Finally. But just as he closed it, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Keep following me and you'll regret it. Daniel scanned the street, but no one was watching. Still, the message made his pulse quicken. Raven knew he was being hunted. And he wasn't afraid. Meanwhile, Michael paced his apartment, phone still warm in his hand. He'd broken his own rule by sending that message, but the pressure was mounting. The closer Mercer came, the thinner the mask felt. For the first time, Michael wondered if he could keep the two worlds separate much longer. Because Mercer wasn't like the others. Mercer wasn't just chasing a myth. He was chasing him. And deep down, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this hunt had only just begun. The thin line. Michael Hudson had long ago accepted solitude as the price of survival. Friends meant exposure. Lovers meant weakness. The quieter his life, the safer his mask remained. He wore invisibility like armor, convincing himself that loneliness was a small price to pay for freedom. But one Thursday evening that armor cracked. He was in a bookstore on Lexington Avenue, a place he visited now and then to maintain the illusion of a normal life. The shop smelled of old paper and roasted coffee from the cafe next door. Michael stood in the corner, scanning the crime section, half amused at how far authors' imaginations strayed from reality. Looking for something particular? A voice asked. He turned. She was standing beside him, holding a stack of books against her chest. Mid-30s, auburn hair tied back loosely, a kind smile that seemed out of place in a city that thrived on indifference. Not really, Michael said, his usual clipped reply. But she didn't walk away. Instead, she tilted her head, studying him. You have the look of someone who reads for distraction, not for pleasure. Michael blinked, momentarily thrown. People didn't notice him. That was the whole point. Before he could respond, she extended a hand. Elena. He hesitated, then shook it. Michael. Her grip was warm, firm. Her smile lingered. Well, Michael, maybe you should try something lighter. A mystery where the detective actually wins instead of all this. She gestured at the shelves of dark thrillers. He gave a faint chuckle, the first genuine one in weeks. Maybe. They ended up leaving the store together, their conversation meandering from books to coffee to the absurdity of city rent. Elena was a teacher, she explained literature at a public high school. She loved her students even when they drove her mad. Teenagers, she said, rolling her eyes. Half of them think Shakespeare invented Instagram. Michael found himself smiling more than he expected. He wasn't used to letting people in, not even a little. Yet Elena's presence felt disarming, like sunlight finding its way through cracks in boarded windows. By the time they parted ways on the corner, she had slipped her number into his hand. Call me, she said, before disappearing into the crowd. Michael stood there for a long time, staring at the slip of paper. A part of him wanted to tear it up immediately. Another part, the part that still remembered warmth, remembered laughter, tucked it carefully into his wallet. That night, Raven returned. Michael crouched on a rooftop in Midtown, black gloves flexing against the chill. Zara's voice hummed in his ear, crisp and focused. Guard rotations are tighter tonight. Be careful. Michael grunted acknowledgement, but his mind wasn't entirely on the job. For the first time in years, something had slipped into his thoughts besides blueprints, codes, and escape routes. Elena's smile flickered in his mind like a light he hadn't realized he missed. He shook it off. Distraction was danger. Distraction got people killed. Still, as he cracked the office safe and retrieved a client's requested documents, he caught himself imagining what Elena might think if she could see him now, masked, precise, moving like a shadow through forbidden spaces. Would she recoil? Or would she understand? The thought unsettled him more than the job itself. Across the city, Agent Daniel Mercer was piecing together his own puzzle. Look at this, he told Marissa Clark, slapping a photo onto the board. Every hit lines up within a 5-mile radius of Midtown. Whoever Raven is, he lives close. He doesn't operate far from home. Marissa frowned. Or he just likes the skyline. Daniel ignored her. He pointed to another detail, a grainy security still from the uptown vault. The guard who had been knocked out swore the intruder wore a mask, but a faint reflection caught in the polished floor showed a silhouette, lean and precise. Not enough for identification, but enough for obsession. He's slipping, Daniel muttered. First a discharged weapon, now a reflection. He's not untouchable. We just have to push harder. He didn't say aloud what was gnawing at him. That raven reminded him of someone he had chased years ago, someone who'd vanished in Brooklyn before Daniel could close the case. The same rhythm, the same invisible signature. And if his instincts were right, that ghost was finally within reach. The following weekend, Michael met Elena for coffee. He told himself it was harmless, a single meeting, nothing more. Yet 2 hours disappeared in conversation, and when they parted, he realized he was already thinking about seeing her again. Days became weeks. Dinners, walks through Central Park, late-night talks over the phone. Elena was sharp, funny, unafraid to challenge him. She asked questions he dodged with half-truths, but never pushed harder than he could manage. For the first time in years, Michael felt something dangerously close to normal. But normal was a luxury he couldn't afford. One evening, after leaving Elena's apartment, Michael noticed the same sedan he'd seen weeks earlier parked down the block. The same polished shoes when a man stepped out, lighting a cigarette but watching too closely. Mercer. Michael's stomach tightened. He had been careful but not careful enough. Elena was now a part of this web, whether she knew it or not. Back in his apartment, he paced while Zara's voice cut through the static. You're losing your edge, she snapped. This Mercer guy, he's good. If you keep letting him get this close, it won't just be you who pays the price. Michael clenched his fists. I can handle him. Not if you keep playing house with your schoolteacher. The words stung mostly because they were true. Michael had been balancing on the thin line between his two worlds for years, but now the line was fraying. One wrong step and everything, Raven, Michael, Elena, would come crashing down. That night as he lay awake, Elena's voice replayed in his head. Call me. He wanted to. He wanted more than the shadows, more than the endless cycle of heists and disguises. But the hunter was closing in, and Michael knew a truth he could never tell her. The man she thought she was falling for didn't exist. Only Raven did. And Raven's world had no room for light.